Welcome to the Say Network podcast. I'm Jim Sparks. I'm here alone still, sadly, but this will pass. And I'm here with Brad Griffin from Fuller Youth Institute. Hello, Brad.
Hey, Jim.
Brad is the Senior Director of Content for the Fuller Youth Institute, where he develops research-based training for youth workers and parents. A speaker, a blogger, a volunteer youth pastor, now a full pastor, right?
You could say that.
That was pretty big.
Fully ordained, yes.
You're fully ordained. I was going to say, I guess a youth pastor is still a full pastor.
That's right.
In a lot of ways. But Brad is the co-author of Growing Young, a book I highly, highly recommend. Well, I recommend all these, but I really, really liked Growing Young. Several sticky faith books, Every Parent's Guide to Navigating Our Digital World, and the series, Can I Ask That? 8 Hard Questions About God and Faith. Brad and his family live in Southern California because, well, he works at Fuller, and that's where Fuller is. And if you have any questions for Brad, it's just easier to find him on a soccer field every Saturday from like August to February. Is that right?
That's pretty true. It's usually where Jim and I catch up is on the soccer field.
That is very true. We were fortunate enough to be on the same team once or twice. Was it just once?
Once or twice, yeah.
Yeah. It feels like a lot because we did see each other a lot, which is cool.
Yeah.
But we had a memorable little all-star season with our boys. That was a lot of fun.
That's right.
And it turns out that Brad and my wife are they raised the competitive standard of cheering. And Brad and I.
She wins.
Yeah, we both sit there and kind of laugh and enjoy the game. But we're still parents, and we still want them to win. But before we get into the whole episode, we want to talk a little bit about youth culture, a youth culture reference for you. And today, it's from a blog post. If you haven't gone to the Fuller Youth Institute blog, you should. Always good content. And so I pulled one today because it's talking about reinventing graduation. We are still under quarantine, and graduations are not just in jeopardy anymore. They are, they're not going to happen at their normal time. Is that fair to say, Brad?
Pretty fair, and still pretty uncertain in a lot of cases. It's true for my daughter. I have a senior this year.
Yeah, boy, it's brutal. My mom, I was talking to her the other day, and my nephew is a senior, and then she's got 2 middle school graduates that are supposed to graduate this year or promote, whatever you call it, and then an elementary school. So like she was gearing up for June, and most of that is not going to happen at all. And so this is a very, very good article written by a contributor, right, Brad?
Hannah Lee. She's newer to our team and has worked with students for years, though. And she's a seasoned youth pastor as well as social worker, and has worked with teenagers in school-based settings as well as church-based. So so she put together some great ideas and thoughts about what to do here, and kind of scoured, some of the best ideas that are out there right now because everybody's scrambling for what to do. So I think it's a helpful resource.
It is a very helpful resource, and it's good for parents as well. And for youth workers. She gives different things you could do, not just practical tips of like putting together, a scrapbook or something like that, which is still very important, but how to listen, how to empathize, how to talk to particularly seniors that are missing out on all those activities. A lot of kids have missed out on,
everything,
the traditional things, senior prom, the just graduation, the trips, and I don't know, just kind of those last moments. It's kind of weird to think. And at first as a parent, I'm like, all right, it's just 1 year, guys. And you're not going to really talk to them anyways, afterwards. That's the cynic part of me initially. But then as I started to digest it a little bit, I just can't imagine some of the sadness that a lot of them feel, and having to there's a lot of like closure issues, probably having to deal with not being able to do those kind of things. And and how tough it is. And I think like Hannah talked about, and at first people were posting memes and kind of making light of it, but now that it's gotten real, I think it's gotten very real for a lot of families. Brad,
Yeah.
what are some things that maybe you guys have talked about doing with seniors? You have a senior.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I got to tell you, it can feel pretty paralyzing actually, because you you have a lot of thoughts about this time and you anticipate it. And I mean, we had already planned some things, and then all of it just goes on hold. So, you know, to be honest, it can be hard to get out of that funk. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel that as a parent, even of,
Yeah.
okay, all the things that I thought we'd be doing right now. And, you think about it, um, well, for years, really, when that transition is going to come. The lack of closure is the biggest one, Jim, you mentioned.
Mm.
And I think what we're trying to get our heads around now is how do we help create some of that closure, even though all the typical ways of doing that are like ripped out from underneath her. So
Yeah.
even just for our own daughter, thinking about ways, how can you, because honestly a virtual meetup is really lame, right? And that's sort of the
Right.
option. So what are ways, I mean, she has a friend who's going to turn 18 this week, so can you even do like a social distant birthday of driving over at the same time and like sitting in your cars and talking, or I don't know, taking a lawn chair to sit on the sidewalk and be 6 feet apart. I mean, there are some of those things. I will say the
Sure.
schools are pretty. Some schools are doing better than others, as you would expect, right? So even figuring out kind of how to make that happen. I think this is a great opportunity for the church. I mean, we're trying
Mm.
to think about, even both as a ministry leader and as a parent, how do we ask our church to come around in some meaningful ways right now? Some of those can be kind of substitutes for the typical. I almost feel like we need a little more than usual in terms of making sure that people are marking this transition.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the reality that the future of even what happens this fall is still pretty uncertain for these grads.
Yeah.
And to recognize we're not saying goodbye right now, because we don't know if it's goodbye. We're
Right.
saying this is a big moment. We're noting it, we're naming it, we're marking it. We're going to help you transition into adulthood. And that may mean a lot of different things for a lot of kids. And um, uh, yeah, that we're gonna maybe even more than usual name that it's different for different kids. I think we could do better than this. Typically, often
Yeah.
you don't want to. Sometimes ministry leaders make too many assumptions about what's next, but this is a great time to not make all those assumptions.
Yeah. It's weird. It's just kind of surreal, and it's hard because we've never dealt with this before, and or had to kind of sort out something like this magnitude, and trying to figure out what's right. And you have your students issue, and obviously, and you're talking about parents, but you also have, extended family, that this is a big deal. And, for some families, this is the first graduation, high school graduation, that any of their family would have been able to experience. And that's a massive deal. And, the celebrations that go through that, and kind of that rite of passage, it feels just weird that that won't happen for some of those. And those are kids that are in our churches. And yeah, I think you're right. Our churches is the time for us to make a deal of this, if we haven't done so before, because I'm thinking of one community, particularly in Hawaii, that has always struggled with high school graduations. And I remember meeting a couple of kids that they were the only kids that have a high school diploma in their family, and like the celebration that took place because they achieved something that others didn't was significant. And that's kind of gone. And so yeah, it's really challenging, but yeah, thinking of creative ways. The virtual stuff is, it's been done. They do it 3-4 times a week right now.
Yeah.
So yeah, what can we do to make something very personal, meaningful, and memorable? Is the stuff that we need to look out for. I don't know. It's weird way to think about it for me, but it's like on the level of like an engagement. Like we put so much thought and creative energy into engagement. I didn't. We got engaged after a funeral, but but the level of thought that goes into those things, or these dumb baby announcements, like the gender reveal. I'd say dumb. People like them. Go ahead, they could like them. But what can we do for grads and doing that is interesting.
Yeah, and really seeing it as a rite of passage,
Yeah.
because in particular in our kind of broader U.S. cultural environment, some cultures within that do better than others at rites of passage along the way, but graduation from high school is a pretty big one. It's one of the few,
Yeah.
actually, that marks, this transition to adulthood. And being able to celebrate that. And I would say celebration is maybe even more important than ever right now, in particular because of the losses, and not only losses that they've experienced, but the losses that might be in front of them. I mean, you're talking about first generation high school grads. I imagine we all serve a lot of students who might be first generation college students in their family. And that is now probably pretty questionable for those kids who would be first generation college students, because it's going to be even more challenging for their families to make that happen in the fall.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was interesting in that article talking about those that may not be able to go to college because of the financial implications right now and dealing with that.
Yeah, it's huge. It's going to be huge.
It didn't cross my mind. So tough times, but something that I think we could do. I think we could kind of figure it out. We just have to be creative and empathetic and very, very, I hate saying this because it's a catchy phrase in Christian world, but just intentional. Like we have to be very kind of focused in on that. In that group, but weird times. We are going to do, for my son's 8th grade promotion, we are going to do a thing in the front yard, and it will just be us, and we are going to allow him to be the speaker of the 8th grade graduation group from his school.
Nice.
So congratulations to him, and his speech will be memorable. So
I can't wait to hear it. I'm sure you'll record it. So
maybe, I don't know. My kids are they've gotten more sophisticated, thankfully, and good. They're like, can you not post that? I'm like, yeah, that's definitely not getting posted. That's fine. And but no, we're trying to have fun in this weird time. So yeah, let's get into some questions, Brad, and Fuller Youth Institute, which is out of Fuller Seminary in Pasadena, California. You've done numerous. First of all, how long have you been? You've been there a long time.
Yeah, over 15 years. Yep.
Yeah, I was going to say you've been there as long as I feel like I've been where I have been. So you guys have done numerous research projects over the years. Which one was the one that really took you back or changed how you thought?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, really, Sticky Faith was pretty transformative for me in terms of changing my mindset around a number of things. And I'll just pull out one aspect of that I think has just been a thread that continued to weave its way through projects, a number of threads. But one of those in particular is acknowledging the role of doubt and questioning in faith formation. And, I think sometimes we can get in this place of, I don't know, kind of wanting to equate faith with certainty. And we forget how much faith is about leaning into mystery and the mysteries of our faith. And, we just celebrated Easter. I mean, how big of a mystery can you get?
Yeah.
Resurrection, like
Yeah.
it's
Totally.
it's bizarre and mysterious, and it should raise wonder and
Yeah.
questions in a really good kind of way. And I think a lot of well-meaning adults kind of shove those questions down when they come up, especially as kids go across that transition into adolescence and their brains start becoming more complex, and the more abstract thinking you get, the more questions naturally come up. I
Mm.
think that we've sometimes we've kind of created a Christian culture where we questions make us anxious and we get worried about kids losing their faith, as in their teenage years. And so that fear about losing faith leads to fear about really addressing those questions and doubts head on and making some space for
Yeah.
them. We found in Sticky Faith that around 70% of high school students these were all youth group kids, that they had real questions and doubts about their faith, but only a fraction of them shared those questions with anybody.
Mm.
And so we started to say that, actually, maybe it's not questions themselves that are toxic to faith. Maybe it's silence.
Yeah.
Because we found that when students did share with someone, when they did have a safe place, in particular, a safe adult, or, like a youth group context to share those, that actually was more correlated with carrying faith on past high school, if they just felt
Mm.
like they could talk about those questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I was laughing when I going through all that, is thinking of the times where I was asked a very difficult question. I was like, oh, well, let's talk about something else. Like, it was an immediate redirect, because I didn't have an answer. I didn't know, and I was afraid of admitting that, or I was kind of afraid of exploring that in a lot of ways myself. That I hadn't done that. It wasn't nothing that I had done before, and so I was afraid myself, and I didn't want to look wrong in front of them. And
Yeah.
clearly, I've learned it to be like, I don't know, and let's try to figure that out, and let's ask more questions, and
Yeah. And I
it
think a lot of
it
us get
helps.
in, I think a lot of us get into ministry because we have so much assurance of faith. I mean,
Hmm.
faith impacts our lives in such a big way, and we want that for other people. And we get into
Yeah,
ministry, and then we realize that, well, most people are just kind of stumbling their way along. And,
yeah,
and teenagers in particular, it's not necessarily, even for those who really, really are committed to exploring faith, it's exploring. It's not necessarily having firm beliefs and commitments all the time.
right, yeah. Um, one there was one thing, I believe it was in the Sticky Faith book, that it I didn't believe at first, and then so I started to ask around, and it was about knowing your parents' testimony, Christian families knowing your parents' testimony, and how little. And I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but it was significantly higher than I would have ever given credit, of how many Christian families don't know their parents' testimony. And and so I was teaching at our training school, our seminary, and so I just asked a question there, and everyone's like, "Oh, I no, I guess I don't know. I've never really heard my parents' testimony," and it was just kind of like shock, and so just even some of the stuff within the Christian family, of not knowing where their where your parents' faith really stood or stands on, and not really knowing. It's just kind of like this weird kind of bubble of agreements, like even just pastors not knowing your pastor's testimony and stuff. This weird kind of agreements of like, oh yeah, we're kind of all worked out, and not really sure how it's worked out. It's that was
Yeah.
that was very kind of mind-boggling to me. But yeah, so the sticky face. So how did that? What was the origin story of it? Where did it get started, and why why pursue kind of this, I don't know, this model, if you will? It because I'll say right now that the Sticky Faith book has been a huge piece to youth workers, um, at least for us in the Salvation Army. But I know for outside. So what's the origin of it?
Yeah. Well, so Fuller Youth Institute is a research-based resourcing arm of Fuller. And so we don't primarily face toward Fuller. We primarily face out towards the field, right? And those who are working with young people in the church and in parachurch ministries and neighborhood ministries. And so a lot of the questions we pursue in research are questions that come to us from youth workers, and questions, that people are wrestling with, that they're wondering about. Sticky Faith came out of those kind of questions, and some other research that was suggesting that about 1 out of 2 young people walk away from God and the church within the first 12 to 18 months after high school. And that was creating a lot of anxiety among leaders. And I mean, that creates a lot of actually disappointment, honestly, because we've spent a lot of time working with students. I've been doing youth ministry for 20 something years, and it's probably 25 years now. I haven't even counted recently. And that's kind of a big letdown to hear that, you have like a 50% failure rate. And it's not laughable at all when we think about the real stories, the real people we invested in. And so we began to explore that, and actually worked with, that question came from the field, and then also from a grad student at Fuller who, she was studying in our School of Psychology, but she had come straight out of a church working as a youth pastor there. And she said, I want to just interview and create a survey and an interview for students who used to be part of our ministry, because I think they're all off at college partying, and I think they've walked away from church. So that little pilot study kind of turned into, what became Sticky Faith. And as we dug deeper and deeper, we began to realize there's so much more going on there. And this is about not only what youth ministries can do differently, but also about the need to lean into families, as you were just talking about, and to lean into the whole church, which eventually led to a follow-up study that generated the Growing Young book and resources, which really is what kind of church do we need to become the church that young people today are really looking for and really thrive within.
Yeah, that's awesome. How has Sticky Faith changed as your kids are growing? Because Sticky Faith, the original book was written 10 years ago.
Yeah, almost 10. Almost 10. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and you were part of that. You were part of the follow up for the youth workers and stuff. So, I always find it interesting as a parent and who's in youth ministry. And I would laugh because I've been teaching about how to work with teenagers for years, and now I have a teenager. I'm like, oh, geez.
Yeah.
And so, how has things changed for you as your kids are getting older and knowing kind of the Sticky Faith?
Yeah, I tell you what. I often say when people ask about that, in many ways, it helps a lot to know what to expect, but it doesn't actually help you be a better parent. I guess. Right. I don't know that I'm actually better at this than anyone else. Right. But it has been really fascinating. So, Jim, I have a 6th grader, a freshman, a high school freshman, and a high school senior. So my wife and I are really in the thick of this right now. And some days that's really fun. Some days it's really awful. Some days you feel like total failures, and other days you think, okay, maybe we have the hang of this. I'm always sort of wearing a couple of hats, and, as a researcher, which sometimes drives my kids crazy.
Dad, another question? Seriously.
Yeah, exactly. As a researcher, it's been really fascinating for me. And I think one of the things that I don't know, has just maybe been galvanized for me through the years is how much young people need parents who are willing to listen and who can be empathetic. I am not always, by a long shot, in an empathetic place with my kids, and I am not always willing to listen. But when I sort of remind myself I think this kid needs to be heard. I think there's something here that maybe I'm not hearing or seeing the way that they're seeing. And when I let my curiosity kick in, um, I'm willing to learn. So, I
Mm,
think that's something that was
that's
really
interesting.
important with Sticky Faith, in particular on the parent side, that has become all the more real to me,
Yeah.
is that I've got to be a student of my kids as they grow. And I have three
Mm,
kids, and they're all
yeah.
different. And I've got to be a student of how each one of them is experiencing life, experiencing adolescence, experiencing school, experiencing our family, and as they're experiencing God. And if that sounds like a lot of work, that's because it is. It is.
Yeah. It is.
It takes a lot of
It is,
energy.
and you're right. They just speak such different languages and live such different lives, even though they're under the same house. It's really bizarre.
Yeah. And I'll say, so we're a family of 5 extroverts. And even that, even having 3 kids who are all extroverts, they're still really different. And,
Yeah.
that has been important for me to notice too. Just the ways that my kids each need something a little bit different.
Yeah. It's such a weird thing. I don't know. Like my sister has just had her first child, and all I can think about is like it's so different. Like I can't even give you advice. Like because your child's going to be different than any three of mine, but it's you just gotta love them and admit failure when you had fail, and pump your fist behind their back when you've done it right. But you can't do it in front of them; they'll call you out real quick.
Yeah, that's right.
Switching gears,
Actually, we try
just
to give
switching gears.
ourselves the
Okay.
best parent awards. I would say we try to give ourselves the best parent awards in front of our kids all the time. It never really works, but it generates
That's
a lot of
very
eye
funny.
rolling. So
Yeah, I have found myself giving myself some accolades in the garage, and like you done did that right, and but it always gets leveled out about 5 minutes after, and so it's fun. It's still fun.
yeah.
Switching gears, you speak and teach and write a lot on navigating the digital world as parents, and we've had some good conversations about this. But how has quarantine and the demand for students to be online more shifted some of your thoughts on managing digital time for kids?
Yeah, it's kind of it seems like a funny joke, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah,
we've we've all heard punchlines lately about screen time going out the door, and
right.
all our concern about digital technology kind of, well, suddenly we're just sort of binging everything. It I think it's an important time for us to pay attention. I think actually being thoughtful about digital media, social media, and consumption, time is more important than ever. At the same
Mm,
time, we're in just a this is an alternative reality. This is an alternative reality where all of our kids are um, on screen all day long for their school. In a lot of cases, it's true for my
yeah,
teenagers, and that's a pretty different navigational reality. Um, it's been different for each of my kids, and it's required a different kind of like, I guess, a different kind of nimbleness as parents. For the biggest adjustment, I think, is probably with younger ones and middle schoolers. My middle schooler has had the hardest time going from being in a classroom every day and being told what to do and where to go next. I mean, the middle school brain needs that
yes,
externalized structure, right?
right,
And now we're moving into a space where, that kid's got to self-pace all day long. That's really
yeah,
hard. That's really hard. And so we've been dealing with, headaches and meltdowns and, some of the stuff that kind of comes along with just being oversaturated by staring at a screen all day and trying to figure out um, online education. Um, with with older kids, what I think it's important for parents to realize is the social piece that is so important. And a lot of our critique of our older kids who are on social media or using their phones and devices, to constantly text and connect with their friends. We're in a time of social distancing. That physical distancing is important, but the social part of it for the teenage brain and body that need peers. They need peers more than ever. And so, actually as parents, we've got to loosen up a bit on some of our typical ways of asking them to put limits on that. And I think that looks different from kid to kid, but just to realize that, okay, now more than ever, they need this connection through digital spaces because they're not getting it in person. And it's important to their thriving. It's important to their mental health.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's
Now,
good.
at the same time, I think there are kids who are, at higher risk than others. I'll say as the research now, COVID is going to maybe blow the research out of the water, but as the research has continued to evolve on the role of digital technology and development and all those things, more and more of what studies are saying is that we really do need to take a kid-to-kid approach, that there are some teenagers who are at higher risk than others of some of the negative outcomes from social media and digital connection, and that we need to be attentive to that. And in particular, as we're thinking about things like limits and breaks and whatever else. And I'll say, even in this time, I just said, to my freshman daughter last night, as she still had her phone on, texting friends at 10:30, and I said, hey, you've still got to turn this off early because anxiety is real for her. And so taking just some practical things like taking breaks, turning off the device 30 minutes to an hour before you go to bed. These are practices that are still really important in this time, even if we're acknowledging that they need to have some more time to make those connections.
Yeah. I think as parents too, it's difficult because we're in such a weird situation that you just kind of say, okay, go ahead, let's just do this because we're going to get through this. And then sometimes with that, you take off rules and filters that are going to be hard to undo later on, and try to figure that out as well. Like, because they're on their phone maybe more, and you're like, oh, I'm sure that's fine. I'm sure it's fine. And so just kind of navigating through some of that as well. It's, you have to give a little bit for sure, and trying to sort that out, and when it's right, when it's not. But I'm glad you brought up the anxiety piece of still having to maintain those boundaries, because those are very real. And I don't think maybe COVID increases it. I don't know, but at the very least, it's still a very significant issue that's not really talked about a lot, as in the parent circle at the very least.
Yeah. And I think parents need to pay a whole lot more attention to anxiety generally. It has certainly become, mental health has become a conversation that is moving to the forefront. We really need to have more conversations. And we certainly hear, back to the work of FYI, a lot of the work that we do comes out of questions from ministry leaders, and questions about anxiety and depression have been some of the top ones we've been hearing the past year or so. And since, the last handful of weeks, since students have been on quarantine and in lockdown mode, we're getting even more, hey, how do we help manage anxiety in this time? Because we're hearing a lot more about it. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the articles and resources you guys have put out for anxiety just in the last month and a half, it just, well, even longer than that actually, but have been very, very well done. And and we've shared them quite a bit from our office, and it's really
Great.
important work. So I will be linking those as well in this. But I don't know. Are you as thankful as I am for not having social media as a kid?
Oh man. Yeah, I don't think I would have survived it. And on the empathy perspective, we often ask adults to imagine, okay, remember when you were a teenager. And when I was a teenager, it was pre-internet. So
Yep.
we connected with our friends. If it wasn't in person, it was by phone. And that phone was on a cord attached to a wall, and
Yep.
that is such a different reality, but it was so important. It was important, even, the friends that you saw all day at school, to go home and to talk for hours on the phone to them. It was important to have those connections.
Yep.
But I can imagine the layers, if I had to navigate those layers that my own kids and the kids in my youth ministry have to navigate now, of social presence across multiple platforms and kind of curating these personas and figuring out how to reconcile that with who you really are, and you don't even know who you really are, and you're working it out in real time. I think it's important for us as adults to appreciate the layers of challenge there, and
Yeah.
the layers of, for some kids in particular, that does become an overwhelming burden. Becomes an
Yeah.
overwhelming burden.
I remember the moment that it really became very, very real to me. I was speaking at an event and I did some stupid game. And within seconds, I felt my phone vibrate, and I looked down on the podium and it said that I was tagged in a picture and by this person. I'm like, that person is sitting right in front of me right now. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this was like very, very early on in being able to do that. And I thought, people could do this in real time while I'm teaching. I'm got this inner dialogue going, people are doing this in real time. And I mean, I try to watch what I say. I'm not great at it always, but like even more so. And I found that it's paralyzing in a lot of ways for me. It's like, gosh, I think back, like as a teenager, I struggled to just I'm not super outgoing actually. I kind of forced that in job roles, but I did like to make people laugh and stuff, but I was so scared to be wrong that I didn't do it. And but now I'm like, if someone could film me doing that and then could take that the wrong way, holy smokes, that would have been destroyed. And so I always laugh because
Oh yeah, and everything. I was just going to say, everything
no, go
becomes
ahead.
a broadcast opportunity. Every moment
Oh
is a
yeah.
broadcast opportunity. And I mean, we wrestle with that in our own household. Of
Yeah.
my youngest is not on social media. My older two are, my high school students. And, they have some shared circles, in particular at church and our youth group, and, but also some at school. And, even talking about like what's okay to film or not film, because sometimes we're in the middle of something as a family and all of us, I realize somebody's phone is out filming what's happening, and I'm like, wait, you didn't ask.
Yes.
What are you going to do with that?
Yeah.
And our girls kind of go back and forth on what is and isn't shareable. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a weird thing, but grateful I didn't have to deal with that when younger, but still have to deal with it now. So, hey, so quarantine has certainly disrupted all of youth ministry and all of ministry, really, and of course many other things. But what good do you think will come from this disruption? Because generally, with a disruption, there is something good that comes out of it. What have you been thinking?
Yeah. Jim, we've been working with youth ministry leaders, church leaders, pastors, for a decade and a half now. And one of the biggest questions that we wrestle with leaders and with teams as they interact with our research, Sticky Faith, Growing Young, other projects, one of the biggest questions that we get is, how do I get my ministry to change? How do I help my church realize a need for change? And especially, as you know, we've spent a lot of energy thinking about intergenerational ministry, how important those relationships across generations are for young people and for their faith development. And one of the things we hear most is that leaders, they'll try things and they'll run into roadblocks. And a lot of those roadblocks are around, well, that's not the way we've always done it.
Right.
And so we've spent a lot of energy exploring church change, exploring how do we become the kind of leaders who can help our churches listen, who can help our churches navigate change. One of the fascinating things about this moment is, well, churches are changing. Churches have to change right now. And this is so disruptive that it's thrown all our normal ways of doing ministry up into the air. Now, I already am hearing from leaders questions about, okay, how can we make sure that there's not a going back to normal after this? Because this change is helping us ask good questions. It's helping us try new things. Finally, there's an openness to say, well, we canceled that this year. We've never canceled that because we've always done it. And everybody said we always had to do it. Well, now that we canceled it, how do we reimagine together what a future can look like and guide our people through that change process? So I think knowing how to navigate change is more important than ever. I think one hopeful piece of this, amidst all the bad, amidst all the hard, that is coming with this, I do think that there's some hope that we can help our churches be different, help our ministries be different moving forward. Whatever that looks like. And I don't know what that looks like yet.
Yeah, that's good. I was thinking of just like an increased level of empathy, it feels like, in this time. I look at church members doing like extra special things because they feel like people are lonely or shut in, and going to their house and singing in their front yard to, all that kind of stuff. And I'm hopeful that becomes more habit, because a lot of times we just kind of go in and we do our thing and we leave, and we love people and we care for them. But this is, in times of stress and discomfort or tragedy, the level increases dramatically. And I feel like we have a higher capacity to be more empathetic and be more caring and thoughtful in that. And I think that helps with what you're talking about with change, of being able to say, hey, yeah, we could do this a little bit differently. But
yeah,
cool. That's a whole giant podcast all by itself. And but
probably
I'm excited. I think what you have to say is spot on, is being able to recognize some areas that could change and for the good. What's next for Fuller Youth Institute? What are you guys working on that you could talk about? Because I know you guys are under like lock and key on your research projects. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, great question. I will say we have just been wrapping up a project really dialed into, you were just talking about empathy, and our project has been really dialed into listening to today's teenagers as a way to help develop more empathy across generations. And we're listening to their biggest questions of identity and purpose and belonging. And we want to help ministry leaders, caring adults, parents, really hear from a new generation about the ways that they're talking about their lives, the ways that they're answering those big questions, and help us to learn to respond faithfully as people who follow Jesus. So we're knee deep in that right now, in the behind the scenes work, but I'm really, really excited about it. And it has just been, it's been really wonderful to listen to
That's
teenagers talk about their lives. And we're going to have a lot to say down the road. So stay tuned.
Oh, hey, we're excited about that. And Well, Brad, thanks for being here, and thanks for joining me in your quarantine studios while I'm in my quarantine studios. I feel like you have to give a caveat during this time so people don't shame you. Are you in the same spot and all that? But if you're interested in any of the resources,
Hey, none of our
we talked
kids
about,
bombed this podcast.
I know. Well, that's because my kids are in the backyard with a 7-gallon bag of gummy bears just eating right now, so they won't come in. Gotta do what you gotta do. So I'll be posting all the links that we've talked about in this episode in the show notes. Don't forget to subscribe to the Say Network podcast on iTunes or Spotify for any updates on new episodes. And don't forget to join us on Facebook every Wednesday afternoon at 3 p.m. for online youth night. Kids and parents are both invited. It's for both of you. Thank you for listening, and we'll be back next week with a new episode. Brad, thanks again. The work you do and have done has and does make a difference. I love reading your stuff. I love what Fuller Youth Institute does, and we thank you for all the quality, important work that you guys do. Thank you, Brad.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for having me.
All right, we'll see you on the soccer field.
Indeed.